Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at this mic here, the AKG C414. This is actually the XLII model. In the past, I've used small diaphragm condenser mics on my top side on my 4 toms, but I've never really felt that I've gotten enough, oomph from my 16-inch floor tom. So we're going to take a look at this one today. Reason why I picked this out is I was rereading an article recently about the Rush Snakes and Arrows album, and I saw that when they set up the drums for Neil Peart's kit, they used an older version of this mic on the top side of all his toms. So I figured, why not check it out, see how it turns out for me. So today we'll discuss some of the features on this microphone, and we'll work through some of the different pickup patterns on the tom and see how it affects the sound and how it affects rejection from the nearby cymbals. So let's start talking about the microphone and the package that it comes with. The case that it comes in, at first impression, I thought, hey, this is a really nice case, until I opened it and it immediately fell over. It was too top heavy, and we'll come back to why it's too top heavy in a minute. So inside the case, you'll see obviously the microphone itself. A very nice velvet case to keep the microphone in as well. That might help to keep a lot of dust out of the mic. There is a foam windscreen as well, and a pretty nice little shock mount for it. The design on the shock mount is kind of interesting. The bottom part turns, it rotates a little bit, and that helps lock the microphone in place. I've used other mics before where you have to do a lot of twisting and turning to lock it in. This is actually has just a very small amount of turning that's required, very little effort. One thing to note about the windscreen that I mentioned earlier is that personally, I'm probably not going to use it because I'm always using my microphones in the studio only. But if you were, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but if you were using this live, you might need to use that to keep out the low end frequencies you get from wind noise. Okay, so back to why the case fell over to begin with. You'll see that the top piece of foam on that top section is actually removable, and there's a whole second compartment in there. Inside, you'll see the manual, you'll see a printout of the frequency response for your microphone, and you'll see a pop filter as well. One thing to note though is that even with all of that stuff taken out, it's still too top heavy. That top part of the case is just too heavy. So, despite the fact that this microphone is kind of legendary and extremely well designed, it seems that this case was maybe a little bit of an engineering nightmare. So onto the actual changeable features on this microphone. For each of them, and there's 3 of them, once you apply phantom power to the microphone, an LED or a pair of LEDs will light up to indicate what setting is currently selected. It will remember what your setting is. I think it's about a half a second that it takes for it to remember. So once you set it, if you wait a half a second, unplug the microphone or shut off the phantom power, put it back, it's going to remember the settings that you had. There's also actually a lock feature for all these settings as well. So if you're going to permanently install this, or you were afraid that, your kids are going to go and try to press all the buttons, the lock feature will make it so it's harder to change the settings accidentally. So the first setting is on the front side of the mic here. This is where you choose the pickup pattern that you want. So you can see there's 5 indicators here for omni, wide cardioid, cardioid, hypercardioid, and bidirectional. So you can set it to each of those 5, and there's actually an in-between setting there too. So there's actually 9 different pickup patterns you can choose from on this mic. On the back side of the mic, there's 2 settings. First, let's talk about this one. This is a pre-attenuator. So this is to help cut down the sound early into the circuitry of the microphone. There is 4 settings on this one. 0, which is, no pre-attenuation. A 6 dB cut, a 12 dB cut, and an 18 dB cut. The second setting is a low-end roll-off, or basically a high-pass filter. There's 4 settings on this one as well. At 0, which means you're not cutting off any low end, 40 hertz, 80 hertz, and 160 hertz. This is also meant to help if you're using this microphone in a live situation, which again, I'm not sure why you would want to, but if that's your poison, then sure. But yeah, it's meant to help cut out more of that wind noise or the rumble you would get from wind noise on this. One last thing to note on that is that the amount that it cuts off on these roll-offs is 6 decibels per octave. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit about what the setup's going to be for the sound samples. As I mentioned, I'm going to be recording this on the top side of my 16-inch floor tom here. This is a Pearl. It's a maple mahogany shell. I'm going to be running the microphone through an API preamp, a 3124 Plus. I'm going to be using the 18 dB pre-attenuator, and I'm not going to be using the low end roll off. As far as the pickup patterns, this is where things are going to get interesting. So I'm going to play a series of beats and I'm going to switch between the pickup patterns. I'm not going to go through all 9. I think 5 of them is going to be probably the most important ones, the ones you're likely going to be using. So I'm going to switch between wide cardioid all the way through hypercardioid. Now, with respect to what you hear in the playback, AKG recommends rolling off the high-end frequencies as part of when you go to mic this on the tom. They recommend cutting off above the 10 kilohertz range. So for sake of consistency with what they recommend, I'm going to roll off above 10K as well. I'm not going to use a gate because I just want you to be able to hear how much bleed there is and how the bleed changes when I'm changing the pickup patterns. Usually for a real recording, I would definitely 100% use a gate, but for these samples, I won't. With respect to the positioning of the mic to the head, AKG, again, their manual, they recommend putting the microphone so that it's aligned with the rim, right? So that this part here is basically aligned to the rim so that the diaphragm is just inside of the drum. They also recommend having the mic 2 to 4 inches away from the tom. I ended up going a little bit on the higher end of that on my setup. They also didn't really indicate, but seemed to indicate that they were, expecting the microphone to be kind of straight into the drum, so right parallel to the head. At least that was kind of what I inferred from the manual. Now I played around with it a little bit, and I felt that if I had the microphone at a slight angle, that I got a better sound. So that is what I went with instead. All right, so let's jump into these sound samples and see what we think. So my very initial first impressions is that I guess I wasn't expecting the pickup pattern to have such an effect on the direct sound. Most notably, that it has such an effect on how much attack there was. So I felt that on the wide cardioid, there was a lot more attack sound, right? And as I approached the hypercardioid, it seemed that the attack gave way, and then you had a lot more of the tone of the drum. So what was your favorite pickup pattern? Both with respect to rejection and with respect to how it affects the direct sound. Let me know in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know if you also use large diaphragm condensers on your drums, or if there's any other sort of uncommon mic setup that you like to use. I'm putting out recording videos like this, helpful for drummers all the time, so if you don't want to miss out, then don't forget to subscribe.